I have to say that I have thoroughly enjoyed a dive like this into a book, because if somebody normally says, would you like to read several hundred pages about science, I look for the short version. Or these days on AI, we go to AI and say, could you give me the summary? That has not been the case here. But before we go too much into my take on the book or into the book itself, I think it might just be worth having a quick introduction to our lovely authors, in case you don't know either of them. Anand and Ranganathan, of course, we're dealing with people who are very smart and erudite. So let's see, we're going to start with St. Stephen's and then Cambridge PhD, so Dr. Anand Ranganathan. He spent 16 years running a lab at the International Center for Genetics Engineering and Biotechnology. Then he joined the Special Center Molecular Medicine at JNU. He's written 5 books. When he has spare time, he also writes columns, and you might know him from appearing a lot on television. And he has some pretty hot tweets as well, or X posts, shall we say. So you might follow him there as well. Sheetal Ranganathan is also very erudite, has got her master's in biotechnology from Ames, and then she pivoted and decided she wanted to get an MBA at Xavier Institute of Management. She's held leadership positions in health and biotech sectors, and she works with life science startups. And she also writes columns in her spare times and sometimes appears on TV too. I don't know if you have hot tweets though. But they have written this book, Forgotten Heroes of Indian Science, and I have to say, I'm quite gobsmacked, because I'm quite a fan of the Forgotten Heroes of India. I've lived in this country almost 2 decades, and I am continuously stunned at how many forgotten, or maybe we should say sometimes smothered, heroes there are. Heritage that many people don't know, that's right around the corner from us. And I think that maybe the decades and decades and decades of colonial subjugation is what helped in that smothering. And that is certainly something that is delved into in the opening of your book with quite, I wouldn't say deep detail, but it's certainly enough to give you a context and setting the scene. It's a deeply researched chock-a-block book, which is what I really enjoyed in reading it. And you'll see that it's got 4 chapters that they're dealing with 5 scientists, because 2 work as a team. But there's so much more in this book. I think it's not just about these 5 scientists, actually. There's so many names and so many stories and so many sub-stories that's been a real treat to read. I particularly like some of the myths and the legends. It's not just quotes, there's yarns as well, which hopefully we'll go into a little bit. Making it feel like a must-read compendium for anyone interested in science, and even people like me who are interested in science but feel sometimes a little overwhelmed by, well, the science of it. This is incredibly accessible, and I'm really grateful to say it's also well written. Which is not often the case, is it, with compendiums. And unlike many books that do feel like compendiums, this is not a list of history, names, and dates. It really is fast-paced, moving. I would say it's more hearty rather than heavy. So I think it's always fun to begin at the beginning and to know what was the inception. Can you paint a picture for the day that the metaphorical light bulb came on and you said, we got to write this? So, who's going to take that question first? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was his idea, I must say.
No, in
I
fact,
rode along.
Okay.
Sorry. First of all, thank you so much, Lindy, for being on the stage with us. It's a real pleasure and an honor. And normally, I'm the one who takes your seat on the left because I'm from JNU. I'm traditionally given that seat. But today somehow, surprise, I'm sitting on the right. And, when you talk about self-deprecatingly that you're scientifically illiterate, that makes the three of us. And I'll tell you why, because till about 2020, I used to think that, yes, I am as much an expert in science as any other scientist, having spent 30 years doing science, and then COVID came. And then I realized that, whatever we knew till that point was not junk, but in order to combat the disease, we needed to come up with new solutions almost every day. And whatever we knew was almost extinct by the time the day ended. And whatever was published was extinct by the time the day ended. So the scientists who were working on COVID for 1.5 years, they found they could not rely on the published literature, because it takes, for any good publication, almost a year, sometimes a year and a half. And if you're publishing in Nature Com, Nature Science, almost 1.5, 2 years. And here things were moving almost every day. Hence the birth of BioXRiv and those non-peer-reviewed internet sites where every single day almost 40, 50 papers would appear. So scientists would do their science on COVID and simply upload it on the net, without worrying about whether it is good or bad, but that's the situation. So to cut a long story short, we are in the same boat. No one's an expert now on anything. That's the honest truth. Coming to the question that you asked, it was 2016 and we were in Kolkata. And our son, we had inducted him in one of those robotics classes, and he won something, and he won a trip to Kolkata, and we said, we'll tag along as well. So it was a good holiday. And while traversing, and some of the areas of Kolkata are so incredible, they're like, in fact, I wrote an article after, it's just saddened me so much. The article is called City of Sorrow, because everything's crumbling, and the history and the architecture and everything. And one such street was named on Upendra Brahmachari. Sarani, street is Sarani, and we didn't know who he was. And then we started to read more and more, and then Sheetal, and that was the point when, I kind of delved into diseases other than tuberculosis, so leishmania, and my collaborator who's a malaria expert. And that we started to read more about parasitic diseases and leishmania, and then, both of us decided, like, here is someone, it's been a century, and the only viable drug made by an Indian in India has been from Upendra Brahmachari. It's been 100 years, Indians have truly made discoveries, but to have a drug that cured a disease and saved millions, it's been done only by Brahmachari, and nobody knew. There's a street is named. The book starts with, on the Google thing, and that's exactly how it happened. There was Upendra Brahmachari. I said, who is Brahmachari and who is... And then we realized what an incredible man he was. He used to come to his lab, driving the pull rickshaw himself. And he was really against the Brits, and he's caught up in that entire thing. But he didn't forget that he needed to save lives. And of course, story within a story within a story. And the Brits kind of were a bit jealous that how is this disease not being cured by a Britisher? So they got in Ronald Ross, who had won a Nobel Prize for identifying the parasite, malaria parasite. And he was defeated. He could not find a cure, and Brahmachari did. So that's the long story short.
It was quite an embarrassment, actually. I mean, you said that he is a scientist. I did study science, and we didn't know that such great things were done in India. And I think that was seriously the self-inspiration. It started with an embarrassment that being science students from India, we don't know about our own heroes. And then, we dug along, and there were so many fantastic, excellent inventions that deserve recognition, and no one even knows. I think that was really the inspiration of bringing it to everyone. Of course, we learned along the way. There were so many unknown facts about history, as well as the people and their inventions and the way they went about it at that point in time, and there was just nothing, no resources, colonial rule. There was just nothing. And if they could produce such extraordinarily life-changing stuff, in those times, then I think India as a country can do so much at this point in
And
time.
if I may add, I'd like to really credit her because the way the book has turned out is unlike what I had, making that book turn out in the beginning, because the way a scientist thinks about other scientists is you talk about that person and his science. And she said, no, let that be on the periphery. Yes, core, but let's talk about the India that was during that time. Let's talk about their struggle. Let's talk about, and then there were literally hundreds of stories. So it's not a biography of these scientists at all. It's not a hagiography. It is the story of India, during the time these people were in that situation. So I think that is what, so thank you to you. Not for the first time, I'm thanking you. To have made that possible. I think that.
Yes,
that
applause, applause, applause. And you can do it again and again and again. I think that's so right. You connected the dots. You first introduced a little of the backstory, which, okay, we all know the British came here, but you really gave us the backstory, linking the story of tea. Actually, I was gonna photocopy a few of the pages to a friend of mine who's a food writer, because I was like, I don't think she knows this. So there's a lot about the story of tea and the connecting the dots between the plantation workers who fell victim to the Kala Azar, the black fever, which is what the breakthrough came on, saving some 500,000 lives before the time he died with that. But then, as you say, there were so many other interesting stories. I'd never heard of, in my ignorance, Maniram, the Assamese man who was quite the character as well. And then, even a foreigner, you were magnanimous with your history telling, but Professor O'Shaughnessy, there were just so many, and that's just the first bit. The whole thing is full of so many other stories that are peppered along the way. So I want to know, though, were you surprised? You mentioned that, okay, we can all think, okay, decades of colonizations would have done some shutting out of histories and egos play a part. But India's been free for a long time. So why is it taken now for this book to come out? Were both of you surprised that it hadn't been done before? And why do you think that is?
Oh, yes. That was the opening statement, right? Embarrassment and shocked. So as and when we started researching for the group, for the book, it was just full of surprises. Every evening when I would read and research and discuss with him, I said, did you know? Did you know this? Of course, we knew the history of it, but exactly the example that you took. How did telegraph come to India? I had no idea. It was always known as, okay, Indian Railways is a gift of the British, of Britain to India. Yes, and everybody sort of knows in general that, the Britishers did it for themselves because they were taking control and, the economy also had to run the way they would like it to be, so the raw material had to be transferred. So railways was a need rather than a development motive for India. But telegraph, it just came as a hobby project. With the person you just mentioned, O'Shaughnessy, who was a biologist at the Calcutta Medical College. He was actually, he by chance discovered that Indian Vaidyas and Hakims were using good old weed, cannabis, to treat mental disorders and also to do surgeries because it would act as an anesthetic. This was not known to the Western world. So he started working on cannabis, and that is how exactly the first Indian drug was made known to the Western world in the modern times. Of course, there were many attempts in the past. We've had full taxonomies written by the Dutch, by the Portuguese, in the 13th century, in the 14th century, where the whole pharmacopoeia of Indian herbs has been popularized, and that's exactly how it traveled, to Greece, to Arabs, etc. However, this one, and he just took it as a hobby project in the field in which the cannabis was being grown. He just took an area and he said, I'm going to do some interesting stuff with the wires, and that's how the telegraph was born. Of course, the Governor General was very smart. He spotted opportunity there. It was, I think, Lord Eden at that point in time. And believe you me, had the telegraph not been laid, 1857, which is generally called the War of Independence, would have been actually the moment of freedom for India. So just because of this hobby project of a scientist, the telegraph was popularized within India, and that's how they tapped into the secret messaging that was flowing around from all those soldiers along the Ganga who were planning the revolt of 1857. Everything was tapped and then just stopped. So in a way, science developed, history became a consequence of this, just the way you were drawing connections between tea and Kala Azar. Had the Britishers not lost the monopoly of tea trade in China, and when I say Britishers, it's basically, the company, the East India Company. Had they not lost the monopoly, had they not got worried about losing the economic hold that they had in India, the whole idea of growing tea in India and making Indians chai drinkers, which was not the case a century ago, right? And now if you actually talk about chai, chai is an Indian word, although cha is actually derived from China.
Right.
In China, tea is called cha.
It's chock-a-block full of little factoids and almost like general knowledge facts that paint the picture around the story. But you mentioned the abundance of herbs, and I really liked the opening chapter to, was it Ramnath Chopra, where you talk about, is it Jivaka? The story of Jivaka, who's asked, bring me samples of all those plants that have no medicinal use for humans. And well, long story short, he couldn't find any. And that's the story of I suppose, Ayurveda, and that's the story of the Indian knowledge system and Indian knowledge of the earth and of these plants that was sort of snuffed out for this more popular Western medicine. But anyway, they did come together, Western and Eastern medicine, and we have lots of other scientists. I'm curious to know, do you guys, as I say, there's many different stories of scientists in the book, but it focuses on 5 main ones, or 4 to work as a pair. Which was your favorite? Each of you, do you each have a favorite, or is it the same or is it different?
No, I know his is different. My favorite is the last story, which is about Subba Rao. Really from the hinterland of what we call Andhra Pradesh today. Failed so many exams, nobody, including his mum, would have thought he would do science.
There's hope for us.
Okay. And suddenly picked up interest, and he didn't even know he was actually living in the same time as Ramanujam, as P. Roy Chaudhary. He just, and at that point, first he wanted to be a banana seller. The next he wanted to be, a monk. He joined the Ramakrishna mission as a student. Third, he wanted to be, because he somehow got good marks after failing his class 10th equivalent for 3 times, to get admission into presidency in Chennai. Then he said, okay, I may want to be a doctor or an Ayurvedic physician, because he almost died. And an Ayurveda physician just saved his life, and he recovered in 10 days. He was on his deathbed. He wanted to become an Ayurvedic physician. And then he said the Paramarth is an Hindi word, which means the final purpose of life. So Param Arth, the meaning, the supreme meaning of life can only be gained by serving people. So instead of going on with his medical profession, he decided to become a scientist. And he's the one behind not 1, not 2, 5 groundbreaking discoveries. And that credit probably goes to Marie Curie or a Max Planck, and no one else in the world who can be Einstein, who can be credited with 5 great things that have changed the face of humanity. The first chemotherapy drug to treat leukemia, methotrexate, which was tested in trials by what people know is probably the best cancer institute in the world. Sidney Farber, instituted it in the US. The second is folic acid as a treatment for tropical sprue, which is beriberi. He almost died of the same disease, and so did his two brothers. A third, in World War II, the only reason why the US could save its soldiers across all the theaters of war, because of a drug he invented called hetrazan for filaria. I mean, there were worms and, soldiers were dying and, And the biochemists in the room would understand there is no life or energy without something called ATP, or adenosine triphosphate. That's the energy currency of the body. This is the man who discovered it. There would be no biochemistry, things would not have moved further. It would have taken time, of course. Somebody would have discovered it, had this man not been alive. So my favorite is Subba Rao, not only because of his contribution, but his story of life, how he just changed everything that almost seemed impossible at every point in time of his life. He just turned it around, not just turned it around, excellence was born from that turnaround. What about you?
So mine is actually a tied 3 in fact, because Colonel Chopra's story is just unbelievable, his, because nothing like that existed for almost 1,000 years. He literally picked up the field of Ayurveda, pharmacology, of what we had forgotten or what we were forced to forget, and then brought in, from Sarpagandha, and that whole time at which he discovered that, and Tibia College, so many things were going on. In fact, I don't know whether there were, as you said, there's so many stories within stories. I can't remember if we added that here. The indelible ink was invented by a gentleman, I forget his name, who was from Tibia College, Unani, this thing, and then he went after partition to Pakistan. So that indelible ink is actually, he was working on Reserpine Sarpagandha as well. And so was Colonel Chopra. And, I think the underlying theme of this whole book is that we are the almost civilization that is the easiest to forget our heroes, Case in point is the entire last month and a half, you can see Canadians, Brits, Australians, wearing that poppy on their thing, and that signifies the lives lost in World War II, I think in Belgium, Flanders, the Battle of Flanders. We don't wear any such thing. Millions of Indians died in World War I and World War II. We were fighting for the king and the country or whatever it may be, but Indians died. I mean, 90% of us won't even know all the names that are etched on India Gate are actually Indian names who died in World War I. And likewise in every field, we just forget our heroes. And here was one person who was meticulously day and night cataloging the medicinal plants. I mean, it's not just father of Indian pharmacology, but I would say, absolute trendsetter. And of course, then Huck and Bose, because fingerprinting, everyone for almost a century, of course, now we have digital fingerprinting and what do you call it?
Aadhaar card?
Aadhaar card, yes. But for almost a century, and to have crime being solved by fingerprinting, and Scotland Yard literally stole their idea. I mean, they were inducted by Indians, and the idea went to Scotland Yard. It was popularized by them, and they died in penury. And, the way they were fighting for, writing petition after petition to give us a few hundred rupees, and can you please give us something? And then the king ordained, yes, let them be given 200, 300 rupees, and this. And I think Huck was buried in the same place where George Orwell was, And,
Motihari in
Motihari,
Bihar is known as the place of birth of George Orwell. Yeah. There cannot be a bigger Orwellian fact to say that the person, the person who invented fingerprinting was also from the same place and died in penury. And George Orwell's house very recently has become
Renovated.
renovated and it become a site to go and visit. But who knows about Huck? No one. His house is somewhere there probably, or not known. Who knows?
I mean, one should find it and put a plaque on it, right? And you know, create a tourist trail for it, if nothing else, as you say. And I liked the way you wove in Sherlock Holmes as well. To that, do you want to?
And these are the things, you know, which would we would hold those discussions. Did you know? You know, did you know that Rudyard Kipling was for 3 years posted in Jamalpur? He started his journalism and writing career from Jamalpur. And Upendranath Brahmachari was born in Jamalpur, and they were walking the same streets. He was a boy, and Rudyard Kipling started his journalism, right? And he was talking about this small little insular town which was making locomotives for India. I mean, these were things, I would also connect then Sholay, you know, actually. It's a movie, you must have seen it, but many people in the room. If you remember the first scene, they are in Jamalpur, you know, where the inspector catches Jay and Viru, and he says, "Jab main Jabalpur mein posted tha," because the locomotives were made there. So there were so many connections of Indian history, not just from the 1800s, but right up to the 1950s. It was amazing.
So what like really surprises me is that you say that this idea only came. What year? What year was this that you were walking around Calcutta?
2016.
2016.
Yes.
Okay.
And 2017 we wrote our first article, in fact.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. But considering how much is in here, that's not a lot of time. How did you do this? What was your research process? Obviously, there were lots of oh my gosh moments over tea and dinner, but how did you actually go about the research process and dig these stories up? Because I would like to, if I can, I just want to read one of my favorite ones because you mentioned it, you alluded to it earlier. And again, this is not exactly pertaining specifically to science, but to the characters that these are. And in some ways, because it's not super related to science, I'm even more intrigued how you came across it. So this is with Brahmachari. And this is a former student, I believe, who says that he was a genius, but also a maverick. His quirkiness was the stuff of folklore. One day, something snapped in him. He protested against, of all things, the hand-drawn rickshaw. We want independence, but are fine with a man pulling another man, he cried. The very next day, we saw him come in a rickshaw, except that it was empty of the passengers, and he was pulling it. Imagine. There ensued mayhem. The English professors were aghast, unconcerned. Thakura, which they called him, was always in his pristine kurta and dhoti, brought the rickshaw to a halt, dropped the handlebar and hopped out of it, then strolled calmly into his lab. I can't forget the scandal it caused. Yes, he was the Mahatma India forgot. So what a story. Isn't that just, you know, the kind of story that makes the hair come up on your arm? How did you find that? Like, that's such a random side little nugget. How did you find that?
So that's a personal anecdote, actually. His student, and it's how small the world is, was Ashima Chatterjee, is one of the first female Indian scientists to have gotten the Bhatnagar Award, which is India's greatest scientific prize. And she was a family friend. As it happens, my parents were professors of chemistry, and so was Ashima, and we know her very well.
Wow, what luck.
Yes.
So you happened to mention that you were writing the story about this guy you'd never heard of, and that she happened to work with.
No. This she told me in 1984.
But you'd forgotten when you then saw the street name.
So that's right, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's just incredible how one thing leads to another.
But what about all the other nuggets, of which there are so many? Okay, that one fell into your lap, yes. But you must have done some massive research.
Yes.
So here I want to, two things, and again, the credit goes to Sheetal. Because one thing that we realized very quickly, that there are so many instances and anecdotes, and because we had decided we're going to talk about the time more than the scientists as well, the time the country was in. So we decided to exclude everything that we knew already. So all the instances that are in there, we had no idea previously. For example, that Indians were not drinkers of tea. For example, that because of tea gardens, the Britishers, they basically cleaned away vast swathes of Assam and Bengal and to make the tea gardens, and that is how the forests were cleared and Kala Azar spread. All those things we had no idea. We had no idea, for example, about Sherlock Holmes and fingerprinting and Colonel Chopra and the way India was at that point of time when Harappa was discovered, 1918, and they crossed their paths. One guy came from Cambridge and Chopra went to Cambridge. So many other things. And then she discovered that in order to know more about Subbarao, in fact, his personal letters have been very well preserved in the Nehru Memorial Library. So she spent a lot of time there, went through all the letters, and they are the ones that are quoted here. And let me also add that, people have written about these people, scientists, but it's not layered with the kind of India that was at that point of time. So yes, even though there are, for example, articles, and we've thanked the people who've talked about fingerprinting, for example. There have been small monograms that have been written. Indian National Science Academy has published a couple, and we've thanked them. But, what was the India of that time? Why were they superseded by the Brits? How did Sherlock Holmes? So that layering, Sheetal gets the credit.
That was out of sheer interest. Even while writing the introduction, we've actually given our view on, this very simple, good virtue of questioning. Question everything around you. And it just one thing led to the other. So we had no idea. It was a joy working on this project because, as I said, every day we were learning so much. It was just uncanny instances that continued, that surfaced. And one thing led to the other, and connections were drawn. For example, he was mentioning, so Ramnath Chopra went to Cambridge, and at the same time, Cunningham invited somebody who came from Cambridge to set up the ASI. And this is Andrew Burton, he basically uncovered Harappa, uncovered
I'm just a bit more on the TV thing, so I know where to keep the mic.
Thank you. Yeah.
You want to make sure she's heard, that's fine.
And when we actually started writing about Ramnath Chopra, for example, it was a shocker that India or Indian Ayurveda physicians, for God knows since when, everybody knew that you do Nadi Pariksha, which is nothing but, this is, you basically just look at your blood pressure.
Let me
do it. Yes. And it was just common knowledge that if in this Nadi Pariksha or pulse, you could actually figure out that you have high blood pressure. And that means you might get diabetes, you might be a person who may get a heart disorder, you may get psychological problems. This was already known as a known fact.
Did anybody here know that this was known for centuries in India before? Okay.
And this was also being treated by this herb called Sarpagandha, just as an extract. Whereas in the US, until the 1940s, before Roosevelt and before Churchill got a stroke, it took those two things to happen for the world to acknowledge that high blood pressure is a problem. Before that, high blood pressure was seen as a means of the body to pick up strength. So all those things about, Churchill enjoying a glass of brandy and whiskey and, I think his blood pressure generally used to be in the range of, you would be surprised 100 by 160. Wow. So this was not even known. Once, and then, this was published, somehow the news spread because Ramnath Chopra did some trials. There was another Indian cardiologist who did some trials in Bombay, Dr. Vakil. The clinical trials got to be known in the West. And that's exactly the biggest pharmacum study in the US started, which acknowledged that high BP is the underlying reason for cardiovascular anomalies. So I think the underlying part over here is that you may prove, and we are both from science, and we do believe that there is a difference between rhetoric and just, people dismiss Ayurveda. It's sometimes seen as quackery. It's fine, but there must be some reason why the Indian civilization has survived for 8,000 years. Instead of dismissing, one should pick up and see what works, what does not. And that's exactly one of the big pharma companies did, Ciba. They picked up. They said, what is this Sarpagandha? Kilos of Sarpagandha was imported into Switzerland. They started from where Ramnath Chopra stopped. They actually zeroed down on that extract, the API that we call today, the active pharmaceutical ingredient of that extract, which became Risapine, the first blockbuster for the world to have treated. What a missed opportunity for India. I think they were so close, so close.
And it was the world's largest selling drug for about 9 years, continuously, until lovastatin, which was another anti-cholesterol drug. But just to add to that, did we learn any lessons? And that is the tragedy, Lindy, because I don't think we have. Let me give you another example. You have, I don't know how many here in this audience know who Lakshmi Kutty is. Please raise your hands if you know who Lakshmi Kutty is. Not very many. And I was in the same boat. Even I didn't know who Lakshmi Kutty was. So let me tell you. Lakshmi Kutty is an 85-year-old woman. She spent 60 years of her life in the forests of Western Ghats. And all she's done is she's collected these medicinal herbs. She's got a pharmacopoeia or cornucopia of 500 medicinal plants. And she uses them to treat tribals and forest dwellers. And 4 years ago, the Indian state decided, in recognition of her work, we will give her a Padma Shri. And she came and she was given Padma Shri, and she was overawed by all that opulence of Rashtrapati Bhavan, and she went back again. But the fact is, we should be having 100 Lakshmi Kutty natural product institutes. And we should be finding out the active ingredient, like in Sarpagandha, was Risapine. Who knows, one active ingredient would be a multi-billion, trillion-dollar anti-diabetes, anti-heart ailment, anti-asthma drug. And if you think this is a figment of my imagination, I want to ask you again, how many of you know who 2UU is? Again, not a single hand has gone up. Let me tell you, I was the same boat. 2UU, just like Lakshmi Kutty, is an 85-year-old woman. Of course, she's Chinese. But just like Lakshmi Kutty, she spent all her life in the forests of China collecting medicinal herbs, treating the indigenous Chinese there, forest dwellers. But unlike Lakshmi Kutty, 2UU isolated the active ingredient of one of her medicinal herbs. And that is the only viable drug right now to treat malaria, artemisinin. And for that, 2UU got the Nobel Prize 4 years ago. And you can almost sense what's going to happen. Some Nordic lab will descend down Western Ghats and request Lakshmi Kutty for that library, and Lakshmi Kutty, being so kind and affable, say, take it away. And they would take it to Sweden. They would isolate the active ingredient, would be a multi-trillion-dollar anti-diabetes drug. They would get the Nobel Prize. And at the Nobel Prize ceremony, they would thank Lakshmi Kutty, and we would be so gratified, we will give her a Bharat Ratna. That's our story,
Oh, okay.
I want to underline it. See, a lot of government will is also needed here. So why do you think 2UU spent so much time going through the compendium of ancient Chinese medicinal knowledge? That is because the Chinese government actually started a Project 62, which was done surreptitiously. And the whole idea was to actually win the Vietnam War. People were dying from malaria. They had a single-minded aim. We have to find a cure of malaria. Some 100 scientists were put together on this single project. And of course, 2UU found that magic drug, which made them win the war. And at the same time, the world actually got saved from malaria. So these are excellent stories of not just scientific expertise, but also the state will of supporting such projects.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. Why do you think that this book hasn't been written before, and why do you think awards for Indians as well don't exist? You do talk a bit about the Nobel and how there's one Indian who's a citizen who's received a Nobel, and three non-resident Indians or Indians abroad who've won it. It's been over 100 years, right? So what's going on there? And you also write or include this section in the fingerprinting chapter from the lovely eugenicist man Francis Galton. Just to give you a tiny little taste, fingerprinting is not needed in civilized lands with honest citizens, but it becomes an absolute must for Europeans who are visiting or living in India or other British colonies to adopt this method as a record of identification of the colonized races, et cetera, et cetera. So do you think there is it racism, or is it something lacking here that is in the Indian psyche that allows, not allows things, but that maybe there isn't enough pride being taken, and that there is a looking out all the time? So where is the problem? Is it internally, or is it externally, or is it going to be that magic answer of both?
I think it's a bit of both. And to be honest, it's not about the Nobel Prize, because, 99.9% of greatest discoveries and inventions don't get the Nobel Prize, because you can only give one or maximum three in one of these scientific subjects every year. And the backlog is such that even for this year's Chemistry Nobel Prize, the work was done in the 1960s. So sometimes you're lucky the work is done 10 years ago, in biology, especially fast-moving field. So somebody who did it in 2009 or 10 or something gets it. But mostly, it's work done in the 50s, 60s, and maybe 50 years from now, a lot of Chinese would start getting the Nobel Prize. But it's not about the prize. I think it's about what we as a nation believe what must be recognized, not just the person, but it's not just the scientist who should be rewarded. It should be the people who worked along with that, So people remember C.V. Raman. Nobody remembers Krishnan. He was the guy who did the experiments, Likewise, and there are so many names like that. And we were very particular that, of course, there are Indian scientists who India remembers. But they're like 5%, maybe not even that. So everyone knows C.V. Raman, possibly because he got the Nobel Prize. We know S.N. Bose and, J.C. Bose, because, Marconi was the one, who kind of literally stole the idea and the radio was born, whatever it may be. But the fact is, we still don't know who G.N. Ramachandran was. He's the guy, contemporary. He passed away in 2001 or 2002, if I'm not mistaken. He should have got 3 Nobel Prizes. One for determining the triple helical structure of collagen, which was remarkable. Second, for the Ramachandran phi-psi plot. 50 years before computers could determine, now you have, AlphaFold, where you have a string of amino acids you call a protein and a peptide, and you feed it.
Which got the Nobel Prize last year.
Got the Nobel Prize last year. Google got the Nobel Prize for that. You can determine the structure of that protein. And this 1960s, Ramachandran literally used the cardboard on which the toilet paper is wrapped. And he used that to determine the phi-psi angles of the peptide bond. And he said, this is how the protein structure would look like. And he had you pick up any biochemistry textbook, the first chapter is Ramachandran phi-psi plot. He should have got for that. CAT scan, tomography, that's all Ramachandran's work. And forget about Nobel Prize. We didn't even give him a Padma because he was a contemporary, We have hoteliers, charlatans who've gotten Padma awards, journalists, I'm not saying, But here is someone who should have, I don't know. So when you don't even recognize a genuine Indian with a Padma, and then an Indian who's been living abroad or who's worked abroad, who gets an Oscar or a Nobel Prize, then the next very month you give him a Bharat Ratna. That tells you that, that you yourself don't know who...
or don't care. I
don't
think the
care.
economics override science and creativity in general, arts also. But I think it is the time. We are out of that zone when we were hand to mouth and struggling and had to get things going. But you see, the guys who actually, C.V. Raman, who got the Nobel Prize, is actually from the same times, right? Yeah. And there was a clique of people. It also depends. All these great guys, it was also a surprise, actually existed in that range of 20 to 30 years. They were all walking the earth at the same time. They were all inspired by each other. They were also, as people say, India's crab mentality. No, they were also, there was no competition. They were rooting for each other. So Upendranath Brahmachari was actually nominated for a Nobel Prize by C.V. Raman, by, because you have to send the nominations. Yes, so then at that point in time, probably that what you just, read out, racism might have been the reason. But now, I believe it is also about the peer group who has to get together and get the same spirit going of inventing something, helping each other, and also crossing lines. When you are a physicist, it's not necessary that you do not discover anything in biology because things are so interconnected. So yeah, also the state will.
Plus, you got to be clever as well. I mean,
Yeah.
C.V. Raman, for example, you might not know this. Russians don't like C.V. Raman because 16 days before the Raman effect was published, the Russians had developed it, as they call it. They don't call it Raman's light scattering, they call it combinatorial scattering. But Raman immediately published it in a newspaper first. And by the time the Russians came up with it, he already had 16 papers and it's written to Lord Rayleigh, and everyone knew, what Raman effect is. So I think that's why I say, yes, there should be a lot of journalism in science, but there ought to be a lot of science in journalism as well. Both of them work.
No, absolutely. I'm amazed at how little science makes it onto the evening news or in the magazines and sites that we read all the time. It's very...
I'm not, because I write an article on Modi and Rahul and you get 700 comments. I write an article on gene sequencing, you've hardly one comment, and that too by her.
Well, hopefully now you guys will support the science posts as well. I would love to open this up a little bit as well, and if anybody has questions they would like to ask these amazing authors, please do.
Yeah, this is Sunil here. Now, how do we correct this situation? Most of the scientists have lived a life of, not being supported at all. Misery is what they have seen in their lifestyle. How do we take care of this in the coming era? There is a lot happening on deep science. There's a lot happening on deep tech. Is there a way an entrepreneurial talent can meet scientists? A scientist alone cannot take their invention to the world. Is there a way that we can put these two together, the entrepreneurial mind coming together with the scientist, and the stories are known at the time when they are built, not after 50 years or 100 years? How do we make the heroes of today start living the world for humanity, not only for India?
So first thing, that's my belief. I think if you've chosen a career in science, you are already an entrepreneur at heart. Because there is no support. You have to build your own ecosystem. You have to win your own grants. You are making pitches, selling your work to the government, to the people who's going to give you the money to take your science from one step to the other. So a scientist, I believe, is an entrepreneur by nature. One has to be. You cannot be a scientist and not an entrepreneur.
I totally disagree, but please continue.
No, because the traditional definition of an entrepreneur is somebody who starts a business and makes revenue out of it. Having crossed to the other side, which is as an ex-scientist to now, on the corporate side of it, I think people have it easy on the corporate side. A scientist is the one who's not only doing the job, creating the products, creating the underlying technology behind it, thinking 2 years ahead, 3 years ahead, 4 years ahead, and at the same time also worried about the funding. That's what an entrepreneur does. But I get the drift of your question. I personally think the industry has to come forward. We've been in the comfort or secure space for a long, long time where making revenue was the biggest thing. And because I belong to that sector, if I pick up pharma, we are still known as the pharmacy of the world, right? Because I won't say we took the easy route out. It was important to build that infrastructure. It was important to build that talent to at least learn what was already being done in a very specialized space of making complex specialty chemicals and now complex specialty, biologics. These are monoclonal antibodies. These are chimeric antigen receptors. So many things. We had to pick up this talent, but now we have. It is time that the big corporate houses take a plunge and put their money, invest, take risks, and give themselves a purpose as well as a mission. We have to have the next best medicine to treat Duchenne muscular dystrophy. I'm just picking it up, okay? Why do others dream of this and we don't? It has to start with a single aim and a single statement, and then, of course, find the right kind of talent which is amply available in India and fund it. I think that would be the way to go. People give it names like public-private partnerships, and there's an R&D fund that has been announced. There are a lot of encouraging signs that have happened exactly this year. Just 2 weeks ago, there was a biggest scientific conference that happened here in Delhi, where a big $1 million R&D fund was announced by the government. Funding is one thing, and it's great, that will open gates, but having a mission is also extremely important. You just don't go, everywhere, run around, and then take chances and get lucky and discover something. No, figure out what India needs. Figure out what the world needs, and that should be made in India or come from India. I know he has a global mindset, so science is global, as we all know. It may come from anywhere as long as it is made accessible to all. But I think it is time that people start taking risks. Governments make it a mission, and then we move ahead. I mean, we've done that in space. There's a live example in front of us, right? Because space has become a mission, space science, and the ministry comes directly under the Prime Minister.
Yeah, I think that's the secret. So, in fact, a lot of my colleagues have started mixing, E. coli, molecular biology with space science because that's where the money is. So let's collaborate with somebody, who has all that money. No, but I'll tell you why I disagree with you, Sheetal. It is because it's a question of been there, done that. It's not that India hasn't had missions. We've had missions. But you look at who's not pitching in. Now, India's R&D spend as a percentage of GDP is one of the lowest. It's 0.65%. Lowest amongst the BRICS nation. And if you were to look at, for example, even other countries, America, it's 3%, 4%, South Korea, 6%. But if you look at the Indian government spend as a percentage of R&D, a percentage of GDP, ours is the same as America. So where America gains is that additional 3-4% is done by the private industry. Out here, you guys are the ones who are not pitching in. It's not the job of the government all the time. You have hundreds of pharma companies, but mostly they are interested in getting the cheap products or cheap drugs from China or, generics. We are the generic you know what Trump just did. He put in, 100% tariffs on I don't know how affected the Indian companies were, but it just needs one sledgehammer for us to wake up, and unless we innovate in that sense, I mean, I took the example of Lakshmi Kutti, you have hundreds of such examples. Why is it that till today, when we know that for the last 100 years, there's not been a single viable vaccine against malaria, 2 are in the market, one is Glaxo and other R21 and RTSS, and they have an efficacy of 28 to 30%, you know. Why, and still ICMR is having quote-unquote expression of interest for vaccines. One possible viable vaccine that was developed by you know, a European Thean immunologist. Expression of interest now. We should be having 100 vaccine candidates. You know, not banking on just one, which might not work, which has been there for 16 years. It's just that now Indians are developing it, taking it forward. You look at tuberculosis. The only viable vaccine is BCG, you know, which is more than a century old. There is no viable vaccine. That is the mission that you're looking for, not just having one, because if you take 100 vaccine candidates, you will possibly get one. But COVID is a great example. We call ourselves the vaccine hub, and yet 90% of the billion-odd doses or 2 billion-odd doses were the Oxford vaccine. You know, we were, on 12th of January 2020, China published the SARS-CoV-2 genome. On 13th of January, 24 hours later, Moderna had applied for phase 1 clinical trials and patent. 24 hours. And we call ourselves the vaccine hub. 3 weeks after that, CDC Atlanta and Australians, they cultured the virus. We took 3 months, another 2 months to give it to Bharat Biotech. Those 3-4 months that we lost, we could have saved millions of lives or hundreds of thousands of lives in the Delta you know, strain, that the Delta wave that struck us next year. But which head rolled? Who resigned? Who was held accountable? No one.
Well,
Long answer to your very short question.
well, and interesting too, because you sort of say the corporates need to do more. You say the government needs to do, and you're still saying, but connect to the scientists and give them, empower them. So I guess the answer is somewhere in between.
Can I have a request? There's one 7-year-old who's bought our book, Devyansh. Oh, you're 10? All right. I saw him raise his hand, so can we have the question from Devyansh, please?
Actually, I had to ask that there are so many good people who have made such good vaccines, such good discoveries that could help mankind. But then how can they be forgotten?
Very pertinent question.
Very, absolutely. And Devyansh, I tell you, the world needs more people like you to remember them. Yes, absolutely. And I hope you grow up and become a scientist first and then the Prime Minister next. But yeah, you're right. But I hope, you know, this book that you've so kindly bought, thank you, would inspire you and a lot of others to, I think, gain inspiration not from the people, but from the surroundings of that time. And you were very right. You know, I think sometimes there's a common purpose that drives people, and when you said so many people collected at the same time, their purpose was, you know, they didn't like the Brits, they didn't like India subjugated, so maybe that was the thing why they were united. We need something, and I think COVID was a golden opportunity, you know, for us to come. And it's not just that, even the Oxford vaccine had adenovirus backbone that in India we were working for 15 years. And yet we couldn't make that vaccine. The inactivated vaccine, which was the Bharat Biotech vaccine, we could have done it because we have used beta-propiolactone to inactivate virus for 40 years, 30 years. And this is where you need to take the responsibility, you know. That's.
We have a question here. Just a second.
Ambassador Puri also has a question.
Thank you so much for your talk, sir. And it was really nice to recall of Rudyard Kipling, and you know, when you talked about Moti Hari had George Orwell there. And my question is that I understand the role of digital media, print media, and literature around, you know, recalling our unsung heroes or forgotten heroes around science. You know, we are forgetting them, and this is bad on us, I would like to say. So what kind of practices someone who's young, who's dwelling into reading books and trying to collect knowledge is, as ma'am was saying, that question, this is a concept which comes from Upanishads also, prashn karo, prashna kulta honi chahiye. So I'm trying to understand, what would you advise? Obviously, we are going to read this book. Apart from that, there are other sources which one should pursue to, kind of fetch their curiosity about the science and the people. Like example of Lakshmi Kuti, I was aware of the person's name, face, but I was forgetting her name. And again, I felt bad about it. This is something which we should be aware of. So would you like to suggest any other sources? Obviously, literatures like this need to come up more and more. But yeah, apart from that, any suggestions, sources?
Yeah, I think we are living in truly the greatest period that mankind has ever lived in. This 20, 30, 40 years is just unbelievable. I mean, we have everything that we could ever want on our fingertips. And now even more so with the AI, And in fact, I had a session with Shailja the other day where I said we should be fired within 5 years because we are redundant. Our job was to discover drugs and vaccines. And a month ago, in the very prestigious paper journal Cell, MIT scientists and 18 other labs, they took 5 elements, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, hydrogen, sulfur, and through AI and deep learning, they constructed 41 million molecules, out of which they made 20, out of which 7 were synthesized, and 4 of them turned out to be the most potent antibiotics known against hospital infections, MRSA. This is what scientists spent half a century to discover. They did it within a month. This is the age we are. So let's not blame anybody if we don't know the way forward. And I'm not one to say that AI is going to be a hindrance. I mean, in fact, I enjoy the fact that AI is here because, let's put it another way, this is exactly what 2,000 years of human wisdom has come to. It has endowed us with, you can say, a companion or a butler who will always have the answers. It's like Jeeves. And this is something which is so precious. So, you would have 2,000, 3,000 years ago, the most precious places on earth would be where you would have libraries, Atlantis, Nalanda. But I think the government also has to play a role. You have the new Nalanda University that's come up, on the old Nalanda. And the government has spent about 2,500 to 3,000 crores in making it. And I'm not very sure now, but until 6 months ago, science was not a discipline that was being taught in this university, I'm all for humanities being taught. You have Ashoka University. Recently, they've inculcated scientific disciplines. But, there has to be a fusion. Like this book, there has to be, history has to be accompanied with science and vice versa,
I want to just add another statement to it. This is known as the period of knowledge economy. Most of the billionaires and the first trillionaire probably is from fields which are knowledge-based fields. I think the time has come when discussions of science, knowledge, etc. take front pages, also take front pages. I'm not saying everything else. But I believe in the last 50, 60 years, I don't think these topics were ever discussed, and hope this book becomes the trigger. And this becomes, like topics of discussion on the dining table or more such panel discussions. And it has to also become easy. It should become a slice of life. People should not be intimidated by science and mathematics. This is not our culture. We've been at our prime, the best mathematicians, the best scientists as Indians. I think it's important to embrace that, gain confidence out of it, and befriend it.
We have a question here.
And we also have one here.
No,
She's been waiting patiently. And then can we go to you, sir? Is that okay? Yeah.
So first of all, I congratulate you both for this really fascinating and much needed dive back and time travel into some of the greatest scientists that India never got to recognize. And I think we live, as you rightly said, in an age when we are going back to heroes in all fields to rebuild and reclaim our civilizational glory and strength, and draw inspiration from it. Now, just two questions that come to my mind. As a diplomat, I remember in the late 90s and early 2000s, I used to boast that we have one of, I think number 2 we were in the string of R&D centers. So when you were looking at these scientists and the kind of conditions under which they did research, did you get any insights into how those R&D centers are today, what they are doing? Because I don't hear too much about, you mentioned one of them, but there are others in other fields. So I would very much like to, and that links up, Sheetal, to what you talked about, the ecosystem. So what kind of ecosystem, what are the lessons that we draw from this very important deep dive into the past and how researchers worked then and scientists worked then? So that is one. The other is, we live in this, as you said, age of acceleration. So in that context, what is the role of discovery and intellectual property? Because that is what has been our bane. Somebody else has taken credit, patented it, and then run with it. And that's where I think the linkage between industry and the scientist becomes critical.
I'll pick up the second one first. And this is where, again, we know that we have a difference of opinion, which is patentability.
I normally never disagree with you. But
yeah, I think given the kind of competition that exists and this war for credit, I do agree, in the incentives attached with patenting. And that really becomes the backbone for the industry. And that's exactly what even Anand referred to. In this case, and exactly why I call a scientist an entrepreneur. They have to be equally competitive, equally opportunistic about doing the right thing, which is important, prioritizing, and really being the first to come to the market. When I say market, I mean whatever the purpose, application, yes, from, bench to bedside, as they say in the drugs industry. But at the same time, there have been instances where, I know he will talk more about it, how was insulin discovered and made available to people, And that's also one of a sub-stories in Subba Rao's chapter, because he was also, at the same time, when insulin was discovered, he was there, and he actually saw the first child being treated of diabetes. So, which also became an inspiration for Subba Rao to do something fantastic, as good as this. In fact, he went to Harvard inspired by that. There is some merit to also do things because they are needed. Whether you let the patent, whether you let the patent to be available to everyone to, to enjoy the fruits or not. I think you should start from here because you have a principled stand on it.
yeah, no, I mean, what I'll say is that now we are all not rooting for, we possibly know that world is very quickly or very soon going to have its first trillionaire. I think Elon Musk might be, or many others. I think Adani and Ambani are going to be left behind a little bit. But, world would already have had at least 4 trillionaires, and we don't even know them. Salk, Sanger, Lee, and Milstein. Salk was the one who, polio vaccine, he didn't patent it. And they asked him why. He said, can you patent the sun? Milstein, monoclonal antibodies, during COVID, anti-cancer, Herceptin, everything. Discovery of monoclonal antibodies, invention of it. He didn't patent it. He said, why? Because I want, the purpose of science is that it should be universally given away. That was the phrase that he used. Sanger, confirmed trillionaire because DNA sequencing for 30 years we used only the Sanger method. He didn't patent it. And Tim Berners-Lee, World Wide Web, he didn't patent it. And you go back to the very first, or not the first, but one of the hymns of Rigveda, our Rigveda. And it says, all that is not shared is lost. So there is something to be said about, and of course I'm not against patenting, because if you don't, the credit, the money that you earn, you can give away that money to charity, but at least you get that money, it's your invention. So I'm all for people who patent. But at the same time, let us also not forget those amazing heroes who decided not to patent. So this is something that is one of the beauties of people who pursue science. That there is something that is always eccentric, esoteric, that politicians and policymakers don't understand.
Can I?
Thank you, please, sir.
Okay. It's less of a question, more of a comment. I think the problem is much deeper, and that is about the respect for science in our society. I believe that Indians lack fundamentally the curiosity needed to prosper science in our lives. You don't have many kids like Devyansh, who's sitting here asking questions, and we say, how can they be forgotten, asking questions. So what happens is that most of the time, we discourage questions. A mom will say, I told you, don't ask me anything else. That's done. Don't ask me a question beyond it, because I'm not going to be making a logic and supplying you with it, or encourage that, or say I don't know. Unless we have that. As an example, you graduate from IIT, you get paid better than if you do a PhD from IIT. A PhD becomes a disqualification rather than a qualification. Unlike the West, you get paid better. Now, unless we encourage our students, science students, to pursue a higher knowledge and pay them for that, reward them for that, how will this ecosystem really thrive? There will be always stars in between who had their own passion, either from birth or wherever, who will pursue it. But they will be far and few in a large society like ours.
Okay, that's a great question. Shall I take that, Sheetal? Yeah. I have a little bit of a different view on there. Because now if any kid, I think no kid should ask mother or parent, how does this work or not? You have Gemini, you have Chat GPT, I always say it as ATP, GTP, Chat GTP.
Keep telling him you only remember GTP.
Grok. So I don't know whether, dear Devyansh, have you ever used an AI, Chat GPT? Ah!
He's honest.
So, there we go. And I think there is a tremendous democratization. It's mind-boggling. So now I think encouragement from the state, from the players, needs to be only to the extent that, buddy, let me unshackle you, let me step back, you run ahead. This is what I want the state to do. Don't interfere, stop interfering. The young generation is just absolute brilliance personified. Don't shackle them. Don't give them all those policies and compliances. And my good friend Gautam is here. He's going to talk about the compliances. He's written a book on 69,000 compliances are needed if you want to start a company. I don't know whether they've reduced or not. But the fact of the matter is, more often than not, the state is a roadblock. Now, I'm just talking purely from a scientific perspective. You come up with an idea, you pitch it, you don't need to go to a university, you have AlphaFold on your fingertips, You have the sequencing machine. Everything is there, available. On the internet, you can read everything that you want. You let a million scientists bloom. The problem is the state gets in. Let me regulate. So the problem is not state encouraging. I want the state to just step away.
I think it's not about the state. It's about the moms.
It's about culture also.
Culture, yeah.
I think we have to break. Yeah. No. It's. Let's blame it on Macaulay. There were structural reforms, there were educational reforms, and we were just told and conditioned to follow a method, and we've been following it. I think AI.
But, let me because Lindy comes from America. You look at the American state. They may have 1,000 problems, 1,000. But one thing they know, and they have known for 100 years, that only enterprise has made America what it is. Yes. Just one single thing. And every politician, you may have the most corrupt politician, Trump, or every politician knows that if America is where it is today, it is because of inventors, innovators, discoverers, scientists, engineers. They just know it. And they never create an impediment. Never. That is what we want.
This note, we should hand it over to Lindy. Yes. It's been time.
One last question.
Well, I would just say they know
Just
it because necessity is the mother of invention, and that's where moms come in, by the way.
Anand, Sheetal, wonderful to hear you in the last 1 hour. I think this room has been captivated. You wouldn't have heard any phones ring. I have 2 questions, and I'm cautiously optimistic about both of them. The first one being, when you were reading or when you were doing your research for these 5 heroes that you've written about, were there others that you left out?
Oh yeah, many.
Okay,
Many.
so that's great. So that's my first.
They find mention in this, and each of them deserve a story.
Fantastic.
We'll have a second edition.
Hopefully, yes. Shawnee, that's on you, the second volume.
So I would love to hear.
Yes,
Yes,
ma'am. We
women
have
too.
3 women, yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So I would love to hear about how did you zero down on these 5. There is obviously an element, and I've gone through a few pages, there is an element of how you have narrated this story and the surroundings, and not just the person themselves, but the story around them. So I'd love to hear about how did you zero down on these 5. The second one, and this is where I disagree with Sir here, the younger parents, or the parents today, actually push children
Can I just
to ask more questions.
are you an entrepreneur? Are you from
No,
the
I'm
field?
not. I'm in the field of forensic, the non-biology forensic.
All right.
So the young parents would actually push their children to ask questions. And some of us with burnt fingers with AI would ban AI and say, ask us. Don't ask anybody else, just ask us. But the question that I was coming from, if you are somebody today, let's say you're a Gen Z, okay, and poor guys, they're thrashed a lot. But the Gen Z, and they're thinking, should I pursue a career in research, in science, biology specifically, in India, because this is where all the action is? Should I hand this book to them? Would they be motivated, demotivated, and not go ahead with that at all? Or would you think they will actually go ahead with that? Those are my 2 questions.
Okay, let me start with the first one. How did we zero on? It was mainly because they had some tangible things to show. I think that's exactly why we zeroed on. They would not have been anything had the others around them had not paved the way. As Anand says, I'm quoting him here, science moves from funeral to funeral. Okay, there are very few people who actually go and in their lifetime achieve something which is of direct application for humans. And that's why I was saying Subba Rao is my favorite, because he had 5, okay, which are directly affecting our lives. And somebody very well known in America as a journalist has quoted, just because Subba Rao lived, that's exactly why you might be living today, right? So, so that's probably the short answer to your first question. Second one?
Just to add to that, Sheetal, before, because it's a very difficult choice, because there was one and Imperial College, he went there, you know, elderly Sikh.
Oh, yeah.
And
Kapani.
Kapani ji.
He's the father of...
Fiber optics.
yes.
We don't know. And we had decided that we would keep him as thing. Unfortunately, he passed away.
Very
And
recently, about a
yes,
year ago.
Yes. So, and the G.N. Ramachandran was, you know, I mentioned G.N. Ramachandran, and there's so many others, but yeah, zeroing in is not easy, but I think at the end of the day, it was also the story of India around that time, you know, and a lot of things we didn't know. India of the 70s and the 80s, because we are children of the 70s and the 80s, we know a lot about that, but 20s, 30s, 19, you know, all that time. So maybe that subconsciously affected us zeroing on the stories that we did not know. That was, and I think second question, I hope so. You know, I hope this book inspires.
If they could do it in such tough times, we have it much easy. We have it really easy today.
Sushant Paji has to ask, because if...
So maybe just two more questions, I think?
Yeah.
But
If Sushant ji doesn't get the mic, he'll beat me up. So I think, yes. Oh, you're a TV debater. You don't need a mic, so please go ahead.
Unlike you, I don't yell on television. Okay, so tell me something. I'm still trying to get my head around a lot of stuff which has been said. I'm very unscientific. But look, one thing about Kapani you said, but Kapani actually was discovered not in India, if I'm not mistaken, right?
That's right.
So the thing is, and this is where I probably agree with Sheetal more than I agree with you, you have to learn from the rest of the world how they monetized technology and science. If you are going to be giving things away, yeah, they were very great men, but I'd rather be an Elon Musk than be the inventor of polio, because at least I didn't know of him, right? The point I'm trying to make is that until and unless you're going to be able to monetize it, until and unless you make it something which brings value, because that's the world we are living in today. We are not living in the Rig Vedic times when everything was free and you could just hand over knowledge, share it. Even now in India, we have this concept that knowledge is free. You don't want to pay for knowledge, right? You will pay for Al Falah University 1 crore of rupees to become a doctor, but otherwise you will not pay for knowledge if you have to read a journal or something. So I think there's an attitudinal change also which needs to be brought about. And I agree with you, government needs to get out, because the moment you form a ministry for something, that's the end of that thing, right? So you get rid of these guys. But the point is, it has to be industry which has to step forward. It has to be industry which has to take the risk on R&D. And most of the government R&D that you are speaking about, you know, if you were to break it down, not look at the big number, but to break it down on how much is actually R&D, I think you will come across a minuscule figure.
Yes, not only that, most of it is actually for the defense sector, which I'm not criticizing at all. I think it's very good. Yes, and because so much of money, and again, space and atomic energy are two departments directly under the Prime Minister. So, you know, a lot of innovation. I mean, you look at ISRO, for example, it's a money spinner. It is sending tens of hundreds of satellites of other countries there, and it could do so because it had unlimited, basically, blank check. But the other question that you asked, I'm sorry, I've forgotten about the first, when you started off.
He just disagreed with you,
Oh,
which
he
is
disagreed.
usually the case.
Oh, okay. Yes. Thank you. Maybe last question.
Yes, the last question.
Hi, good evening, sir. Good evening, ma'am. Nice to see you again. So I'm Shivarti, and just as a brief background, I've come from a master's in biotech and LLB, and with a cross-section of IP, tech data, etc. as a practice area. I have a very quick question. Most of it has been said and done. From yours and ma'am's opinion, from your point, apart from the fact that policy should stay out of innovation, I personally also worked in R&D for a bit of my career, and then, of course, now I run my own law firm, and we are greatly into this new sphere of practice. with the deep tech funds and the R&I funds by the government is one thing. But if you think there is one policy push that a government can delete or add, what would that be, in your opinion, to harness this better? Because we meet a lot of entrepreneurs, VCs, day in and day out, and everyone is wanting to be on the go and make this work. But from a policy angle, I just want your 2 cents on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Sheetal, you want to take that?
I think you've given the answer already. I'm just going to underline it. Just stay out of it. Break the bureaucratic hurdles. Unshackle inventions. And I personally also believe that as a policy push, somehow make science and scientists, who are generally very well regarded as far as the status is concerned, but that doesn't show in the financial status. I think that needs to change. Even at university level, we have to put incentive structures in place that reward people to take those risks. Corporates have a reason to do it. They are profit-oriented organizations. They will file for patents. They will try to be the first to invent. They would like to make a product out of it and, harness revenue for years after. But what about academics? That's when fundamental science gets done. What incentives do they have to bring those radical ideas, which are then actually taken up by corporates to develop into those applications? I think if I would have to tell, or if I have to recommend something which is just something, I believe we have to really rework the incentive structure for the universities where the fundamental research happens.
And I think if one policy, if I can, sorry.
With the salary of the cabinet secretary.
Oh.
The day you stop that, you have sorted out the problem. But if all salaries follow cabinet secretary who does nothing, gets so much, and people who do a lot get nothing, I'm sorry, it doesn't work.
Gautam, you have to get that policy change done now.
Yes.
Also, sir, just another thing. The great reset of innovation in the world of Gen I, generative AI, that also in terms of policy, just anything that you think can push it, because innovation has innovated itself.
So let me, because you asked for a policy, and I think we were a bit abstract in saying that, look, the government needs to get out of it, and you wanted a specific policy. Let me give you a specific policy. First of all, the Ministry for Science and Technology
Dissolve.
Yes, but by the time till such time it is not dissolved, let it give those tens of thousands of crores that it gives out to applied sciences. I'm not saying fundamental sciences is not important. Please don't misunderstand me, because half of my research has happened in fundamental areas. But this country right now, especially after COVID and after the disasters that continue to happen, we need an absolute thrust on applied sciences. So yes, you want to find out the inner workings of ribosome or RNA polymerase and all that. Let foreign agencies welcome DBT, other funds fund it. But as far as DST, DBT, and Ministry of Science is concerned, you only fund projects that are totally focused towards a vaccine against malaria, against tuberculosis, against filariasis, against neglected Indian diseases, or making a drug, totally application oriented. I think that should be one policy that should be implemented immediately, rather than us, dishing out. I know it. I mean, half the projects that scientists write are, do rats smell in stereo, or do we have this ribosome working, in this way? What is the histone? It's great. Fundamental research is absolutely important. But let Indian government, whose money is so precious and little, spend it on innovation. Let's get some vaccines in,
Gautam, 2 policy changes.
Two policy changes and so many ideas, and I think the overwhelming feeling is let's champion the scientist. And the way we can start tonight, of course, is get your copy of the book, get it signed, read it, share it. Let's start making scientists and those who pursue it and champion it, let's make them the heroes, right? Sheetal and Anand, thank you so much for this book, and thank you for sharing tonight.